Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Frank and this is Romney, and we're here with Her Honour Judge Charlotte Wallace at the District Court of Western Australia. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and future. First Nations people have a complex history with the justice system, and we recognise the continuing challenges that they face.
Hiddington is running this session to have a chat about mental health, people starting their careers. Most of us are students and about to head into practice. As students ourselves, we've heard and can see the law is a challenging field. Becoming a lawyer is exciting, but it can be testing. We are here to have this discussion with Her Honour about her own advice for people coming through and ask some questions from you about how to keep on top of these challenges. Judge Wallace will give some remarks and then we'll have the Q&A.
I'd like to introduce Her Honour Judge Wallace now. Her Honour Judge Charlotte Wallace was appointed to the District Court of Western Australia in 2019. Upon her appointment to the court, Her Honour was a senior member of the State Administrative Tribunal and headed the Human Rights and Building Disputes jurisdictions, as well as working on commercial and vocational matters. Judge Wallace graduated with honours in both psychology and law and holds a Master of Laws in Intellectual Property. Her Honour began her career in Sydney and practiced there for 8 years, working at Allens and Freehills in commercial litigation. She then joined the Perth office of Freehills, where she remained until appointment as a full-time member of the State Administrative Tribunal in 2011. She established the State Administrative Tribunal's inaugural pro bono scheme and was the scheme coordinator as well. Thank you, Judge.
Thanks for having me, guys. So the presentation today will be split into two areas. One will be a discussion about my own career and how that all evolved, that I think might be useful and certainly would have been useful for me as a law student. And then the second part will come into play really in relation to mental health and how I have managed mental health over time. And hopefully that will be of some use, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and hopefully there won't be questions that I can't answer. But I'm obviously in a leadership role now, and often leadership roles begin from very humble beginnings, and I am no exception in that regard. So my family came out to Australia from the UK when I was 10, so it was the 1980s. Mum and Dad didn't have employment here in Perth, so it was a bit of a stretch looking for a better life, and it was quite uncertain times, and I recall feeling that. We didn't have a source of income, we didn't have anywhere to live, we were in a caravan on the outskirts of Perth, kind of wondering where we go next. Dad had some history in oil and gas, and luckily for him, he did find employment in a place called Jabiru in the Northern Territory. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that place. I hope to never go back. Coming from the UK, it was like living in Mars. I actually thought that there were aliens living in Jabiru. I came across a few that looked like that, but anyway, it was very red, exceptionally hot. And coming from the UK, I hadn't seen a lot of flies in my time, certainly not flies on steroids, and these things were massive, and they would go into every cavity that they could find. So that was the beginnings. Then we relocated to Perth from Jabiru, but with oil and gas, my dad got a job in Karratha, and I actually went to Karratha Senior High School, which was a bit of a journey in and of itself. A lot of the teachers there did their country stint and then moved on, so it was quite transient, and it was difficult. There were lots of challenges there. However, the benefit was having a small country town kind of feel about it. So there were positives and negatives, but I did struggle in that environment. Leaving school, I was interested in law. I didn't really work very hard in year 12 for lots of reasons I won't go into, but I couldn't get into law as a result of those things. But I went into psychology, which I also really enjoyed, and I didn't really know where I wanted to go. Studied psychology at Murdoch for 3 years, actually really enjoyed it, but wasn't really feeling it. Still interested in law, decided to apply to get into law and actually got into law. So that was the 6 years that I spent at uni, 3 in psych, 3 doing the 4-year law degree. And it's funny because you think, oh, that psychology is a waste of time, but actually I've used that psychology a lot in my legal career. I obviously really love university. I think it's changed over time, but I really loved it. So then I thought, well, what can I do to stand out from the crowd? Which, as we know, law is very competitive to get a job, particularly in Perth. And Murdoch had just started their intellectual property master's degree. And I was interested in IP. It was new at the time. And I thought I'd do that because my ambition was to go east and then eventually work overseas. So IP seemed to be a good fit at the time. Back in those days, you could still plan to work overseas. COVID-19 hadn't happened, so I could have those dreams. And it actually worked. That was probably the first time I'd ever planned anything in my life. Everything else happened unplanned, but I did IP. I applied to various large firms over east and had lots of offers from firms that did IP. So it was good. And that's why I did my first 8 years in Sydney. And I loved it. And I did IP mainly in litigation. Now, we'll talk about mental health in a moment, and everything in life is your perception. I was expecting working in a large firm to work 24/7. That was my perception and expectation, and that is what I did. There's no doubt about it. Now, have things changed over time? In Sydney, unlikely, because that's the nature of the beast there. Did I have mental health issues? No, I loved it because I was expecting to do that, and I actually did really fantastic work, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. It's not sustainable, as often these things aren't. So you can do that for a few years and really excel. The changing point for me was when I had my first child, and that slowed things down for me. And often it's outside forces that actually slow things down rather than yourself. I thought I'd just continue as I was. And I'd worked the number of years you need to work to make senior associate at the time, and everyone, all my peers were getting senior associate. I was as well. And then I was called into my supervising partner's office, and he sat me down. He was very old school, and we've still got a great relationship, so I understand where it was coming from. But he said, you're going to be distracted for a while. You're going to have a baby. You'll be going off to maternity leave. You'll probably come back part-time, which was not a decision I'd actually made, but probably was going to. And he said, we'll put off senior associate until you get back. You're not usually prepared for those discussions when they happen because nobody gives you the heads up. You're just kind of in the moment, in shock, which I was, because I'd worked for and earned it and was expected to get it, which didn't happen. So I went away, sucked it up, thought about it, went back, had a further conversation with him about why I should get it. And he told me the story about when he married his wife. She had to give up work. I'm assuming it was the 1900s. I don't know when that used to happen. But he told me that story to kind of lift my spirits about how far we'd come, you know, and it didn't do that. So I'm sharing this story. I hope it doesn't happen anymore. But it was demoralizing, actually. What did I do about it? This is pretty gutsy when I look back. I actually did go to HR and complain, which is just a nonsense when I think about it, because the partners rule the roost. So HR was not going to tell them to promote me, and that's what they told me. So I was like, I didn't have a mentor in the firm, and I know a lot of firms have that now, which I think is great. There wasn't any committees or groups that would support women in the legal profession or anything like that, and I know there is now. So there was nothing really to change it. And what I've learned in life is fear is the biggest motivator. I know this because I've mediated for a long time. I've used it against people very successfully. And I was very fearful of falling behind. And I think one of the messages I want to give you today is please never fear that you'll fall behind. Every experience is a learning experience, and don't let that dictate where you're going to go. But because of fear, I only took 4 months off with my first child, and he was a nightmare. So that was very difficult. And I went back to work 4 days a week, but effectively was working 7. And that was because of my fear of needing to not lose time, which was all ridiculous. So that was very exhausting. I went back. I didn't feel the work was the same. Was it just my subjective perception? Possibly. It felt different. Maybe I was different. And the message from that is often we are in positions during the course of our life where we actually do feel undervalued and demoralised, and it will happen to all of us, not because we're not worth anything, but it happens. It's part of the learning, and you can just stay there and suck it up, or you can move on. And one thing I've always known, thank God, is I had options. I never felt I didn't have options, even when I was unhappy. When I was unhappy, I chose to stay there. And if I was really unhappy, then I would leave. I wouldn't fear leaving. And I get the impression that today, students today are more open to changing and having multiple maybe careers or positions, which I think is great. And I was ahead of the time because, you know, if I wasn't happy, then eventually I would move on. And that kind of gives you power in that situation, if nothing else does. So that's what I did. I decided to move back to Perth at that stage. So I had 8 years in Sydney, didn't go to New York City or any of those things. Of course, got married, had a baby, came back to Perth because I thought I would get challenging, interesting work, but have a proper work-life balance. Because Perth is definitely not as crazy as Sydney. I can tell you that now, having worked in both jurisdictions. The next curveball happened, and I did get senior associate eventually. The next curveball happened when I found out I was pregnant with twins. That was a bit of a struggle. So I kind of thought, well, I'm not going to do what I did before because that was a mistake. I'm going to take 12 months off. I've got a toddler at home, 2 more on the way. And I'm not going to go back 4 days a week. So I just can't, you have to know your own limitations, and that just wasn't going to happen for me. It's interesting, when I went back to work, and hopefully it's not like this now, I definitely didn't get the good work. It wasn't perception, there's no doubt about it. And I was told when I raised it that clients thought I wasn't accessible all the time because I was 3 days a week, which is just a nonsense when you think about it. You've got your mobile phone, you've got your laptop. We're all accessible all the time. And I think that's a perception that's changed since I was in a large commercial law firm. And again, I think that's an advancement that we needed to make. But it meant that I wasn't getting really good work. And I became quite despondent. Guess what happened? Fear came in. So fear was my response to that. Or I'm not getting good work, I'm falling behind in my career. This is all meaningless and pointless and whatever. And I thought, well, I need to go back to work full time because that's what I'm being told. I'm not accessible. So I'll do that even though I've got 3 kids, you know, barely at school. That'll work out well for me. And this was great. This is kind of a terrible story, but it was a really important point in my life. So I went to the partner and I said, I'm going to come back full time. And he said, oh, you need a business case to do that. I thought, well, really? Like, yeah, you need to, you know, have a business case. And I thought, well, you've got Woodside and BHP and Rio Tinto and Westpac. I don't think John down the road with his legal issues is really going to be the kind of business case that you want me to bring into this firm. Like, I'm thinking, what clients? Can I go to Coles, do my shop and bring them in? And it was just such a nonsense request that I kind of thought, yeah, okay, I need to leave. I think it's time for me to go. That's just ridiculous. And my husband, and this is where the rest of my career was totally unplanned, and this happens as well. So be comfortable with this, guys, when it happens, because it will. I was kind of thinking, oh, this is all pointless. I don't know where my career is going. It's all a waste of time. I'll just get a job in Bunnings. I'll be happier anyway. And then my husband cut out an ad in the paper for the State Administrative Tribunal. They were looking for members. And he said, oh, what about this? This sounds all right. I thought, what's that? I don't even know where SAT is. What does it do, you know? And he said, no, I think it'd be great for you. And he's a plumber, so he knows everything. And I looked it up. I went to their website and I saw that members there are decision makers, they're presiding at hearings, they're conducting mediations, lots of different areas of law, over 100 pieces of state legislation, commercial, civil, human rights, development and planning, vocational regulation. It looked really interesting. And I thought, well, I've never been there. I'm never going to get this position, but you've just got to give it a go. So I applied. I got a letter rejecting me initially, and I thought, fair call. That was an error. So I remember my supervising partner, because I was very open. I wanted to be open and transparent with him, and I wanted to maintain the relationship. And I told him, I've got this rejection letter, and he said, oh, that's too bad. And then I got a call saying, that was an error, actually. Can you come in for an interview? And he said, they are just so unprofessional. I really don't think you should go for that interview. And I said, no, I'm really desperate to leave, so I think I will. And I went for the interview, and sometimes in life things just feel right. And we had a great chat. It was Justice Cheney, who's now a mentor of mine, and we just clicked. And sometimes people are looking for the right fit for their organisation. They're looking for somebody that's hardworking, intelligent, can do the job, but far more importantly, reflects the values of the organisation and can positively add to the culture, which he felt that I could, and I got that position. I spent 8.5 years at SAT, firstly as a member and then as a senior member, working in all the areas. It was very, very rewarding, very challenging, very exciting work, and really changing people's lives that come to the tribunal. I found it very fulfilling. Out of all the work that I've done in my career, other than where I am now, Chief Judge is around the corner, other than where I am now, which is meaningful and fulfilling in a different way, it just topped everything I'd ever done. And I was so blessed to be able to do that job. But the funny thing is, I'd never planned to be there. All through my legal studies and work, I had never ever thought I'll be a judge or I'll be a decision maker or I'm working towards that ever in a million years. So it just goes to show that sometimes things go in the right direction and you're lucky enough that things happen the way that they should. And when things feel right, they generally are right for you. So another bit of advice is, if things don't feel right, then they're probably not right, and that's okay. It taught me a number of powerful lessons. One is the justice system needs to be available to all, and not just by words, but by actions. People have to have a voice, and it has to be a voice that's strong enough to be heard. And when you get into your profession, in your careers, you'll understand what that means. People have the right to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter who they are. The best outcomes for me in a hearing was when the losing party would thank me for how I treated them. Now that's success. It's not, the successful party always thinks you're amazing. They've just won, okay? I know I've done a good job when the losing party stops and they say, I understand the reason for your decision and thank you for listening. So I learned a lot, and I think my SAT journey, well, I know my SAT journey brought me where I am now, because I'd like to think that I did that job with integrity and I did it to the best of my ability, and I treated people with respect, and I became known for those things, and people were mentoring me. Justice Cheney was mentoring me, and I think mentorship is very important in the legal profession, essential. We learn a lot from each other. And people were saying, I think you'd be a great judge. And I think, well, it wasn't something I thought. I was happy where I was, by the way. I was never unhappy. Every other job I'd left because you get that dissatisfaction. But SAT, I never felt that. I felt home at SAT. But people said, I think you'd be good in this role. And it happened. So I didn't campaign for the role. That isn't what I did. But it did come to me. And again, I think it was the right move. I could have stayed where I was, which was very, very comfortable, because 8.5 years in, I knew what I was doing. So it was less of a stretch over time. And we can be, a lot of people don't want to move from those positions. Coming to the district court was very, very hard for me. I didn't have a criminal background. 80% or more of what we do is criminal trials. It's very frightening, and it's high pressure and it's relentless. Why would I want to do that from where I was? Because I thought, I'm up for the challenge. That's what we're here for. The colleagues at the district court are very collegiate. They're very supportive, incredibly. You could ring a fellow judge at 11, 12 o'clock at night. They'll answer your call. They'll tell you about cases. They'll pull up cases to support you. Like, everyone shares the reputation of the court together. We all have ownership of it. We're all invested in it. We want all of us to do our best. And there's nothing that we wouldn't do for each other. So again, It's different to firms, because in firms you're fighting for promotions or you're fighting for positions. Decision makers are all paid the same. We're all on the same level. There's no competition. But yeah, we share a uniform reputation of the court. We don't want the court to not have a good reputation, and we all contribute to that. And it's a hard job, and we want to support each other, and it's incredible. We have coffee every morning. Everyone's invited to coffee. There's a bell that goes, we all go down, and, you know, we tease each other and joke, you know, and do all of that because it's important. It's a tough gig, and the cases are pretty horrendous at times. So I think that humour and banter that we give each other is very important. And yeah, so it's challenging, but it's very rewarding. So some of the tips before we move to mental health, some of the tips I would give you guys starting out, and they make sense, I suppose you may have heard them before, but I've lived them. One is self-belief, know who you are. It's not other people who define us, it's we define ourselves, we choose our own journeys. The voice that we hear the most or the loudest is our own. So if you tell yourself something negative about you, then that is what you will believe. So self-belief is very important. I say this to my kids all the time and they don't want to listen to me. But when they're saying negative things about themselves, they're useless, they were hopeless, whatever, I'll say that's great because you will believe that and that's what you will be. And other people will believe your message too, because other people can feel it coming off you. So self-belief, know who you are, know where you're going. Also know that you can't always change your environment, but you can leave it. And that's a very important thing to remember because people can feel helpless at times. You're not helpless. Okay, if you're really miserable, just leave. You've got options. You're all incredible people studying law. It's very, very hard. Small percentage of people can do it. So you're right up there. If you're not happy in an environment, it's not the right one for you. If you can not break any bridges or whatever the phrase is, burn any bridges, break them, try to leave without doing that because the legal profession is very small. I've always maintained relationships even when I've been unhappy, and it stood me in very good stead over time. Reflect the values you want to see in others. So what you want from other people, you do. So often in court, you know, I'll have a barrister that's quite rude or aggressive or whatever, and I'm reflecting the value that I want to see in them. Eventually, I don't let them get away with it and I call them out on it, but it's very important that you reflect what you want from other people. And just remember, everything you do matters. Every small thing you do matters because people will remember. So I've done things in my career 10, 20 years ago, and I've met somebody for a brief period of time and they've remembered that interaction. So people remember things. So do your best every time. You just don't know where that relationship's going to lead. In relation to mental health, I look at mental health from a proactive position. I think it's very important to maintain your mental health like you do your physical health. So when I talk about mental health, I fortunately haven't suffered significant mental health issues, but I think it's because I maintain my mental health fitness like I do my physical fitness. The tools that I use include mindfulness. Everyone talks about mindfulness. I find mindfulness really important. I'm quite practiced now at switching off. I have lots of friends that aren't in the law. That really helps because law can be boring to talk about all the time. I don't like to talk about the law all the time. That's what I've got Conrad for. So we talk about other things. But mindfulness is just, you know, I'll walk the dog every day and I'm not thinking about work. And you have to actually try hard once you're in the profession because you can think about it all the time. You know, you can take your shoes off and feel the sand and all those sorts of things. Mindfulness is really good for somebody that works really hard and, you know, the job is relentless and I might be working on a charge for a jury till midnight. So mindfulness is really important because I don't want to go to bed thinking about that. There's lots of things I see in the office I don't want to think about and I don't have to. I also find routine is very important for mental health because human beings like predictability. When things are unpredictable, we actually find that very stressful. So when I'm really stressed, I will maintain certain and routines, because I'll get comfort from those. Physical fitness, very important for the mind. Body and the mind are very interconnected. And what I was talking about before, managing your emotions and your thoughts and feelings. People don't think they can, but actually you can. And I've become quite good at that because as law students and lawyers and judges, we have very high standards. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And so we can be very cruel to ourselves when we feel we don't maintain those. And as judges, our failures are there for everyone to see. Just ask the Court of Appeal. So it's very, very hard. But you can stop yourself with negative thoughts and feelings, and you need to keep telling yourself that you actually are in control of how you feel. And I say this to the guys I work with all the time. If you want to be in that moment of negativity, have that moment. It's important. You can't stop those thoughts and feelings, but recognize what it is, learn the lesson from it, and move on. None of us is perfect. We are going to make mistakes, and I've made lots of really big ones, and they are opportunities to learn. And if you don't make mistakes, then you're not learning anything. But I think we think that other people are watching us far more than what they actually are, and we are our worst critic always. And as I said before, you will start becoming those negative views of yourself. That's what you will portray to the outside world, and that's what they'll accept you as ultimately. Self-doubt is important because it propels us to do better, but it has a very small place. Take care of your energy resources. They're finite. You think you've got boundless amounts of energy, you don't. It's really important to rest. It's important to sleep well. If you like a few alcoholic drinks, I do from time to time, you'll know that you don't sleep well afterwards. So you need to plan those. If I'm charging a jury the next day, I'm not going to be having a few wines because I know that I won't sleep well. I'll be dehydrated. Sleep's very important. Rest is very important. We all know we're ineffective when we haven't rested well, and sleep deprivation will affect your mental health well-being. Delegation and prioritizing things, again, is a link to mental health. You can't do everything. If you pressure yourself to achieve everything, you're never going to be able to do that. And I find that I struggle sometimes when I want to do it all and complete everything. You can't delegate right now because I can, but delegation is important. And if you can't do that, just prioritize. Not everything needs to be done. Conrad knows my big hate is social media, not his. I love his. So Piddington social media is very important to mental health, but I'm talking about all the other stuff. And a lot of people say, well, I've got all these things I need to do and I feel a bit harassed. And a lot of it is actually responding and reading social media. Now, I know it's part of life, but not all of it's important, is it? So I don't know. People don't need to see what you've eaten for dinner, or you don't need to like somebody's photos. What if you don't like them? This is why I'm not on social media. I would find it really hard to like something that I find really ugly, like somebody's baby. So I've been known to say, ugh. So anyway, but you know what I'm saying, okay? Balance. You can't do everything. Very important is breathing. I found in stressful moments, particularly when barristers are really annoying me, you can stop breathing or take shallow breaths and you become quite tight. Luckily for them, I know how to do breathing exercises to calm myself down so that I'm still respectful and kind to them when I tell them to move on. But breathing exercises are your best friend if you're feeling stressed. And there's lots of really good ones online. But I've found over time that's perfect. Be proactive, because in a moment we're going to talk about what firms have on offer, and wherever you end up employed, what are they going to do to support you with your mental health? Well, I like to look at it from the perspective, what are you going to do to support your mental health? Because I find with a lot of firms and even the court, the tribunal, there are things in place, but people don't access them. So it can be box ticking unless you're actually going to do something proactive about your mental health. So some people think, well, when I collapse in a heap, then I'll see a psychologist. Or when I'm really, I have a mental breakdown, I'll go and get some counselling. Actually, mental health is about ensuring you do not reach that point. So you actually are supposed to be accessing those things before you get there. So judges in this court, we do have mental health. We have 4 sessions, I think, a year with a psychologist. We've got online and telephone counselling unlimited. And a lot of us will just book in when we've got a free day or whatever and just do it, because it's good to just offload that stress and anxiety that you may be unaware you're carrying, unless you have somebody who's a professional that you can just get it all out. And it means that you're not carrying it each year into year, and then it eventually will break you because it's got to go somewhere. So we're not feeling that we need to see someone, but that's when you should see someone. So if a firm is offering these things and you don't discuss it with people, you don't want people to think you're struggling or whatever the perception. But I think it's really essential that, you know, we're talking about mental health, that we accessing it, because the stats will show that a lot of people still don't. And maybe they think they don't need it. But what I'm saying is access it so you never need it. That's what it's for. Now, I think that's everything I wanted to say. The only other thing about mental health is self-enhancers, which is it's very important to have balance in your life. Students always have balance. But when you get out there, it can sometimes be a dog environment. It's very challenging. It's very competitive. You can lose touch with the other things that are important in your life, whether it be, I don't know, I don't want to say book club because that's really boring, but the exciting stuff you guys are into, you know, whether it be volunteering or sports or whatever it is, don't let go. It actually really helps your mental health, and it switches off from this legal profession, which is really only a small part of who we are. It's not the totality of us. So I think it's important to remember that. So I think that's it. And now I will move over here.
Thank you for that. One of the things I kind of found interesting about that is just the fear of not being left behind, because that was actually something we were talking about earlier, kind of slowing down with uni, taking some time off, and obviously moving away from your cohort's a little bit scary, but I definitely think that's an important thing to remember.
I think just remember your career is a long time. It's the rest of your life. And I don't think we should ever be in a rush. So my son, who's studying law, he's taking a gap year next year. And that's something I really wish I'd done. And obviously I should have after 7 years at uni. But I think every experience you have is a learning experience. It's something that you can add. It adds to your level of maturity. And employers are looking for somebody that's had life experience outside of just doing your degree. So I think don't be held back by worrying about career progression. It will happen. It's inevitable. It's like getting older.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I can relate to, that competitive drive. It's something that I can use as fuel and the right mindset to go and get something done. But I do recognise that it's certainly probably quite toxic to be looking at my peers and thinking, well, what can I do that will make me sort of better in conjunction to them? I should be thinking about it in a completely different sort of way. It should be better for myself. And I think that's something that extends past just people in uni, but also in firms as well. I think being competitive can be really useful, but at the same time, it's not good for your mental health to kind of be self-deprecating in that way too, because you're not living up to these false expectations against someone that isn't you. You should always be living up against the better person you were before.
Well, it may be impossible as well, because people have different attributes and skills. So you may be comparing yourself to somebody that has a very different skill set to you, and then ignoring your own natural skills that possibly they don't have. So really your biggest competitor will always be you, because you want to advance you personally by doing better each time as against your past performance. So when you measure yourself against somebody else, it's really almost a nonsense. And people have their own journeys, and it may be that, you know, their ambitions and pathway is going to be completely different to yours. You just don't know it yet, but you're distracted by them. So
it is exactly that. It's a distraction. Yeah.
All right, moving on to our first questions. So you touched on this a little bit earlier already, but we are looking at you have worked in both the public and the private sector. We've been wondering if there has been a difference with respect to the culture around mental health and the support available.
You have to remember that I was in private practice over a decade ago, so I think things have changed in fairness to firms. My experience was people didn't talk about mental health when you're in a law firm. I think if you talked about it, you'd be seen as weak and struggling and, you know, not carrying the load, etc. So it wasn't terribly good then. I think it's improved over time. I imagine it has. But you have to really target the size firm that you think is going to best suit the culture you're looking for. I went to large firms because A, I wanted to travel, so I wanted to work internationally, and B, I thought that, you know, the training and education would be top notch, and it actually was. So both those things I valued were reflected in the choice that I made. I don't know about mental health. I think maybe smaller and medium-sized firms could have done that better, but large firms back then didn't do that well. Private sector does it well, and I think, like I said before, you have to access it though. So they'll put things in place, but you're not encouraged necessarily to do it. So you've got to take ownership and responsibility with those things. The tribunal did it really well. The court does it really well. We have judicial yoga, for example, and it's here in the building. Conrad's smirking. I'm all right in lycra, I'm just telling you.
That's fantastic.
But it does two things. One, it's that mindfulness and physical activity, but also we do laugh at each other. It's quite funny. And that's a good mental health release as well. But I think in fairness to the private sector, it probably has changed a lot since I was last in it. But I think when you're looking for a job, you have your priorities. What's the top things you want from that firm? It's what it can offer you. And often in your first job, you're not necessarily just focusing on mental health. You're probably focusing on other things like specialty area, the reputation of the firm, whether you want to travel, you know, those sorts of things.
I wanted to ask you something that you touched on before, specifically changes around how people work before and after COVID. And I want to ask, particularly if you think that working from home arrangements are beneficial or not in regards to mental health. On one hand, it might be so much easier to do the work that you do in a very sort of comfortable environment that can be less structured than a typical sort of day at work. But on the other hand, I think it could potentially lead you to being available 24/7 and having to therefore work 24/7. What are your thoughts on that sort of arrangements?
I'm a big supporter of working from home. Yeah, massive. I think we've shown that it can work really well. I think you have to have boundaries in place, and I think you're far more efficient. You know, you can do a lot in probably less time, and then have more time to yourself. So I do judgment writing from home. So we're given specific time for judgment writing. So we're not actually in court. If you do it from home, you could say start, if you're an early bird, you could start at 7 o'clock, work till 12, have a couple of hours off, you know, take the dog down to the river or whatever. You're actually completing a lot more work in a shorter period of time. I suppose it depends on your role, but I think you do have to have boundaries as to when you're available and when you're not available. And there needs to be policies in place as to how that works. But both at the tribunal, the court probably less so, because we do tend to be in court every day unless we're judgment writing. It probably doesn't work as well. The tribunal, it worked really well. And I know they've done remote hearings, remote mediations where people are just logging in. It's getting very high tech. And I think that's great. So parties can, you know, attend a hearing from their home. They're far more relaxed. You can imagine giving evidence and not having to be in a formal setting. And I think we're all very forgiving of, you know, people having dogs on their laps or whatever it is, you know. So I think it can and does work really well.
Fantastic. There was something you mentioned in your presentation specifically around mental health and alcohol. I think that alcohol certainly plays a role in the culture of a lot of more private firms. And I think that while, like the Friday afternoon drinks can be really useful in sort of building workplace rapport, I think it might be completely at odds with sort of mental health generally. And as you said, you've got to be really careful to use alcohol in a way that where you're still getting enough sleep and you're prioritizing mental health. My question is, do you think that the way that the legal profession as a whole tends to approach alcohol and that culture is getting outdated?
Well, I haven't been in a firm for a long time, so it'd be interesting to know whether that happens a lot. So when I was in large firms, it wouldn't just be a Friday afternoon, it'd be all the time. Drinks would be available, there'd be long lunches and all the rest of it, which is completely contrary to really the way society perceives alcoholism now. And in fact, most of the offenders we see, alcohol is there, even with those with entrenched drug addictions. They're usually committing crimes actually intoxicated on alcohol, as well as drugs or just alcohol. Or even everyday lovely people like you who are committing a crime for the first time are intoxicated. So we know, and those people who have issues with alcohol always have issues with mental health. So there's a clear link there. I'd like to think things are changing. We have to be very careful about what happens in the workplace as well. It's really not a good idea to be getting intoxicated or drinking to that level with people that you work with. All sorts of things can go awry. So my view is it's nice to do those things. I think in an appropriate setting, if you're going to have, we take our staff out a number of times a year and we'll go to a bar and we'll have food and drinks and whatever, and it's out of the office. And that's nice team building. It's showing that, you know, we really value what you do. So it has a place. But I think if it's at work upstairs and there's a feeling that you need to be part of the team and you need to be part of the club and you need to do that, I think it's totally wrong. I don't think it has a place in the legal profession to that extent anymore.
Yeah. Is there just time for one more, Jonathan?
Probably two more.
Oh, yeah.
Two more.
This is one from the audience. So what has inspired you to enter into the legal profession, and have there ever been any moments of doubt during your journey?
There were no lawyers in my family, so I didn't know any, so I wasn't inspired from that perspective. I did like to argue a lot, and I like to win those arguments, and people would always say to me, oh, you should be a lawyer because you're really annoying. And then my son came along and he was really annoying like that too, and I said to him, you should be a lawyer, and now he's doing law. So maybe it's personality driven that people thought, oh, that'd be a good profession for you. So I remembered people saying that. But you don't know until you're there, do you? When I studied law, I thought, yeah, this is a good fit. When I got my first job, I thought, yeah, this is a good fit. So I've never thought it was a bad move for me. If I had, then I would have abandoned it. I wouldn't have had a second thought about that. There were positions where I thought I'm not enjoying this as much as I think I should. And there's such diversity in law that you can actually move around. It's quite flexible. I even thought at one stage going in-house, doing in-house counsel or doing other things. So I think it offers a lot of variety. But no, I'm lucky in that I've always had the sense that I was in the right profession, but I also had the sense that if I wasn't enjoying it, there probably are other professions I'd enjoy as well, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that's all my questions, actually. Yeah, unless you have anything further to ask.
I mean, maybe just a little one. Would you say there's any, like, when you've been looking for new jobs over the years, was there any particular sort of signs, green flags, I guess, that you were looking out for in different positions to move into?
I usually had my criteria at the time. So you've got to have some idea about where you're going, even if you're wrong about where you're going. So, you know, definitely if I wanted to do a specialty field that would direct me in certain places, I always knew who was doing what and who was doing it well. So I think you have to do your research. You look at what firms are putting out, you know, what they're publishing these days, what their social media is. It will tell you a lot about the firm, what their policies are on certain things. So if you want to have a family, you would be interested to know what their policies are on maternity leave, part-time leave. And Perth's a small place, so if you can talk to people who have worked at that firm, it's a big green light if people work there and they enjoy it. You can also find out pretty easily how long people have been there and whether the turnover is high, and that will indicate to you a level of unhappiness. Sometimes in life, you just need a job, okay, as well. So when I went to Sydney, yeah, there were top firms that I wanted. I'd done my IP, and luckily for me, I could just take my pick. But sometimes you just need a foot in the door, because once you have a foot in the door, it's easier to get another job. The first job is always hardest. And I did things to make myself look more attractive, you know, the clerkships, volunteer work, all of those things. You do those things to get a feel for the law, so you know you're in the right area. Try and get a feel for where you want to be. But also you're building those connections and that experience. You know, there's a lot of people that would come to the tribunal and just say, look, you know, I want to see what the tribunal's like, and that would look good on a CV. I'll be a case manager there. And they really love it. And you see a variety of different areas of law. So I think be proactive, but there's a lot of information out there. And I think happiness, staff happiness is the biggest green light. If people are happy there, culture's everything, you know. But if you want to go there because they're the best in a certain area, well, you know, even if the culture's meh, you know, you're still going to learn a lot. So if that's your priority, that's your mission, you'll achieve that. But I think it's knowing what you want to get out of the place, how long you want to be there, whether you're going to do other things. Some areas of law are easier to travel with than others. Litigation's a bit harder, it's jurisdiction specific. So you just need to think about all of those things.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, that's all we have time for. Hope you've enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. To thank you very much, Judge Wallace, for your time and candor today. It's been so good to have a senior person in the profession to talk openly and honestly about these issues with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.